The blizzard had swallowed everything. Fences vanished. Trees bowed low under the weight of white silence. The sky pressed close, gray and heavy, like it didn't want to let go. Clara Whitmore had just finished nailing, shut the last of the shutters when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Not wind, not ice breaking loose from the roof, not the old barn groaning in protest. A cry, faint, high-pitched, human. She froze, breath clouding in front of her lips. Then she heard it again, closer this time, fragile, desperate, like a heartbeat breaking through the storm. She didn't hesitate. Grabbing her coat, she pushed through the front door and into the whiteout. The wind clawing at her like it had a grudge to settle. She moved by instinct, not sight, her boots crunching over ice and memory. 10 steps past the paddock, she nearly tripped. Something was there, half buried in snow, wrapped in a faded red cloth. The bundle moved, let out another soft, hoarse wail. Clara fell to her knees. It was a baby, barely breathing, skin cold as stone, a shallow cut on the forehead, frozen blood dried dark. The fabric wrapped around it bore patterns she recognized, Comanche symbols, handmade, sacred. Her hands moved before her mind caught up. She lifted the baby, held it against her chest, and ran. 3 days later, a shadow appeared on the ridge. Not alone. 100 warriors rode behind him, and Clara Whitmore was standing on the porch, with the baby still in her arms. The storm didn't break for another 12 hours, and neither did Clara. She sat through the night with the baby in her arms, rocking gently by the fire in a chair that had once belonged to her mother. She didn't sleep, didn't eat. Her body moved on instinct, the way her hands adjusted the blanket, the way she kept 2 fingers on the child's wrist to monitor the fading pulse. The fever came fast. It shimmered on the baby's skin like heat trying to fight through ice. She pressed cool cloths to the tiny forehead, whispered nonsense in a voice she hadn't used in years. The fire roared, dried her lips, made the walls sweat, but she didn't move. At first light, the child stirred. A weak cry, no stronger than a creak in old wood. But it was something. She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her arms ached, her back screamed, but she kept rocking. And then the knocking began, not at the door, in her head. "What have you done?" By midday, the snow had softened to a dull, slushy quiet. The world outside looked like it had survived a war. Fences buried, trees broken, the windmill at the edge of the field leaning drunkenly westward. Clara changed the baby's wrapping. She did it slow, careful, eyes tracking every bruise and cut. The child, no more than 8 months old, had a gash on his temple and several small abrasions along his arm. But what made her heart freeze wasn't the wounds. It was the necklace, a small carved bone on a leather cord, symbolic, protective, and undeniably Comanche. She had lived near the Comanche territories all her life. Her late husband had traded horses with them before the war turned good intentions into suspicion. She remembered the signs, remembered the warnings. This child was a chieftain's son, or worse, a warrior's only blood. She bundled him tighter and stared out the window. No one had seen her bring him in. Yet, that afternoon she heard the hooves. Not many, just one horse. She moved the baby into the bedroom, tucked him beneath a wool quilt, and pressed a hand over his tiny chest until she felt breath. Then she stepped onto the porch. The rider was familiar. Eustace Carter, her nearest neighbor. 50 acres east and 3 drinks into madness on any given day. He stopped short when he saw her. "Clara," he said, voice sharp. "You all right?" "Thought maybe the roof caved in." "I'm fine." "You sure?" "Fella in town said he saw tracks near your place. Fresh ones. Right before the storm hit." Clara's jaw tensed. "Maybe just my own." Eustace sniffed, eyes narrowing. "You see any strangers out here?" "Just snow." He gave a slow nod. "Well, you be careful. Word is a hunting party went missing last week. Comanche. Some say they were near the ridge. I'll keep my doors locked." "You do that." He didn't ride off immediately, just sat there a moment longer, squinting past her toward the cabin windows. She didn't blink, didn't breathe. Finally, he turned his horse and rode back into the white. That night, the baby wouldn't stop crying. He wasn't hungry. He wasn't cold. He was scared. She held him close, walking slow circles around the small room, whispering lullabies she hadn't thought of in years. Songs her mother used to hum. Songs that once made her own son stop fussing before he... She caught herself. Before nothing. Before memory tried to dig up the grave she'd spent 5 years covering with silence. The child's fingers curled around her shirt. She didn't pull away. On the second day, someone else came. This time it was Mary Finch, the pastor's wife. Tall, nosy, brittle as burnt sugar. She brought bread wrapped in cloth and concern wrapped in curiosity. Clara forced a smile. "Storm, break your fence?" Mary asked, glancing toward the fields. "Part of it. Any help needed?" "No. You've been quiet. I like it that way." Mary looked toward the window. "Anyone? Stop by?" Clara tilted her head. "You mean anyone like who?" Mary's smile sharpened. "Well, you'd know if they had." Clara didn't flinch. She took the bread, said thank you, and closed the door without another word. Behind her, the baby stirred in the next room, and outside the sky darkened, like it knew what tomorrow would bring. That night, Clara made a decision. She couldn't hide the baby forever, not with neighbors sniffing like hounds and snow melting into the kind of mud that held tracks longer than memory, but she also couldn't give him up. The child had clung to her finger earlier that evening, his tiny grip stronger than it should have been. His eyes, dark and wide, followed her as if he already understood something she hadn't said aloud. He was watching. He was learning who she was. And for the first time in 5 years, Clara felt like someone was depending on her again. She stayed up sharpening the kitchen knife, not because she expected violence, but because she knew it would find her if it wanted to. She moved the rifle from the mantel to the table, loaded it, checked it twice, and then she waited. The wind shifted after midnight. The baby slept in a basket lined with wool and faith just beside the stove. Clara sat by the door, hand on the rifle, eyes on the snow. At some point she must have dozed, because she woke with a start to the sound of hoofbeats. 3 men, riders. Their outlines appeared like ghosts through the thin veil of pre-dawn mist. Not neighbors, not white men. They wore buffalo hides and paint across their cheeks. The horses didn't stomp or snort. They moved like shadows, intentional, focused. Clara didn't move, didn't reach for the rifle, didn't even breathe. One of them dismounted. He didn't approach the house. Instead, he walked slowly toward the chicken coop, knelt, and ran his hand through the snow. He was following something. Clara's heart sank. They know. But then he did something unexpected. He turned, looked directly at her window, and bowed his head once. Then he mounted again. The 3 men vanished the way they came, quietly, powerfully, like wind changing direction. She didn't tell the baby. She just picked him up, held him close, and whispered, "They know you're here, and they didn't take you. Yet." She wasn't sure if she was warning him or herself. The 3rd day came without warning. It arrived like judgment. The baby was sleeping peacefully when the sound rolled over the ridge, distant at first, like thunder, then louder, clearer. Hooves, hundreds. Clara stepped out onto the porch. There, across the ridge, spilling like a black ribbon over the hills, was a sight no one had seen in 2 decades. Comanche warriors. 100, maybe more. Silent, armed, mounted with perfect posture and intent. At their head rode a man draped in a red cloak. Long braids, broad shoulders. A scar that traced his left jaw like lightning. He stopped 50 yards from her house and dismounted, alone. He walked the distance in measured steps, dust rising around his boots despite the wet ground. Clara stayed on the porch. The baby stirred in her arms. When the man reached the bottom of the steps, he looked up. Then he spoke. "You saved my son." Clara nodded once. "I did. He was left behind, not by mistake, by mercy. His mother died. The party was ambushed. We thought he had died too." "I heard him cry," she said softly. "You heard my blood scream, and you answered." There was silence. Then he asked, "Will you give him back to me?" She didn't answer at first. Then, "Will you take him from me if I say no?" He blinked once. "No." I wasn't trying to keep him, she said, voice low, but I wasn't ready to lose him either. You did not lose him. You brought him back. Clara looked down at the child. He doesn't even cry anymore when I hold him. The man nodded, then stepped forward, held out his hands. But instead of taking the baby, he simply touched the boy's foot, gently, reverently. He looked up at her again. You are now a part of his story. And what does that mean? He stood straighter. In our way, it means you are blood, and blood is never left behind. Then he turned to the ridge, raised a hand. One rider broke from the group, a woman, draped in blue, carrying something, a cradle board, the traditional way to carry Comanche infants, woven with leather, feathers, and protection symbols. But there was something else in the woman's hand, a necklace, the same as the baby's. The man took it, stepped back toward Clara. He didn't ask permission. He simply moved slowly, lifted the baby's necklace, and replaced it with the one in his hand. This one was newer, brighter, a sign. I give him a new name, he said, and I give you a new name too. She raised an eyebrow. What name? He looked her dead in the eye. Mother who hears. When the warriors rode away, Clara stood on the porch, still holding the baby. He would go with them in the morning. She knew that now, but for one more night, he was hers, and that somehow was enough. Clara didn't sleep that night. She tried. She stoked the fire, fed the baby warm milk, even laid her head beside him on the worn feather mattress. But sleep wouldn't come, because now that she knew the boy had a name, a father, a place to go, she realized she wasn't ready to let him leave. Not yet. At dawn, frost had crept over the windows, painting them in fine filigree like lace spun from ghosts. Clara rose quietly, wrapped the baby in a soft shawl she hadn't worn in years, and carried him to the porch. The land was still, no hooves on the wind, no warriors on the ridge, just silence, and the deep, aching weight of goodbye. She rocked him slowly, pressing her lips to the crown of his head. Little Hawk, she whispered, that's what I would have called you. The boy stirred in his sleep, brow twitching gently, like he was dreaming of someplace warmer, softer. And then from the tree line came the sound of hooves, but only one. The rider was the woman from the day before. No cloak, no feathers, just a rough wool shawl, a bundle of cloth, and quiet eyes like still water. She dismounted without a word and approached the steps. Clara rose, baby in arms, and met her gaze. His father? She asked. The woman shook her head. He waits. He does not wish to take him from your hands. That is not the way. Clara swallowed hard. I suppose I should say something. The woman tilted her head. He already heard you, when you stepped into snow to lift what death had left behind. Clara didn't speak, didn't move. Her arms didn't want to let go. So the woman stepped closer, gently, slowly, and reached out. But the baby cried. Not a wail, not distress, just a soft, half-waking murmur, as he twisted and buried his face in Clara's collarbone. She froze. So did the woman. And then Clara spoke. Can I see where he'll go? They rode together. Clara on her old mule, the baby bundled close against her chest. The woman rode beside her, not speaking, but not judging either. They crossed the creek, wound through the pines, climbed toward a rise that opened onto a small clearing. And there, beneath the rise, sat the encampment. Tents made of hide and wood, smoke curling from a fire pit, children running barefoot in the wet snow, dogs barking lazily in the sun. A village, a life. The warriors weren't all there anymore. Most had moved on, dispersed like storm clouds after a purpose passed. Only the red-cloaked man remained, seated by the fire. He rose as they approached. No weapons, no ceremony, just eyes fixed on the child. And something else, a tremble in his throat when the baby looked up at him. The woman dismounted first, moving to the fire. Clara remained still, the boy against her chest. Then slowly she got down and carried him the final steps herself. When she reached the father, she didn't speak. She just looked at him, long and steady, and whispered, You waited. I didn't know if you would. He took the child and nodded. I wait for what is mine, and I wait for what is sacred." The boy didn't cry. He simply looked up, as if he recognized something older than memory. The man held him with both arms, his fingers shaking slightly. Clara stepped back, but he stopped her, held out a hand, and in it, an object wrapped in cloth. She opened it. Inside was a carved medallion of bone and turquoise, a pendant worn by clan protectors, a symbol of guardianship. "He will know your name," the man said. "I already do," came a voice behind them. It was the woman. She stepped forward, placing a hand on Clara's shoulder. "In our tongue, we do not call you the white woman who saved him. We call you Natuanea, she who walks between worlds." Clara lowered her head. She didn't cry, not then, but she held the pendant tight in her palm, felt the shape of something she didn't yet understand, and whispered, "Then tell him, I didn't just save his life." She looked up. "He saved mine." That evening, Clara rode back alone. No baby in her arms, no sound but the wind in the trees, but the fire in her house never felt warmer, and the silence never felt less lonely. She placed the pendant above the mantel, where sunlight touched it each morning, and every Sunday she baked a loaf of sweet cornbread. She made two, one for herself, and one left on a flat stone by the creek. It had been nearly 2 weeks since the baby was carried away in his father's arms, since Clara stood in the clearing and watched the fire catch his cheeks like gold, since her house became silent again, but not empty. The baby's crib still stood by the stove. She hadn't moved it, didn't dust it either. She let it stay with the smell of ash and wool and milk, a quiet altar to something real, something warm, something lost and not lost. Each morning she walked to the creek, left her cornbread on the flat stone, didn't look back, didn't wait to see if it disappeared, but it always did. On the 15th day, the hooves returned. She knew the sound now, not thunder, not attack, just presence, purpose. She was sewing near the window when she heard them, slow, even hoofbeats, approaching not from the ridge, but from the woods near the back of her land. 3 riders, no weapons drawn, just silence. And then one rider dismounted, a woman, the same woman. Clara opened the door before the knock. The two stood in the threshold, the space between them charged with something that had grown too large for words. Then the woman spoke. "He was sick." Clara's heart turned, but the voice continued, steady. "A fever. From the wound. It came fast. We feared it would take him." Clara clutched the doorframe. "But he lived," the woman said. A pause, then, "He called for you." Clara blinked. "What?" "He said nothing. He has no words yet. But he cried when we took the red shawl from him, the one you wrapped him in." Clara looked down. Her hands were trembling. "He knew your smell," the woman continued. "And his father said, a child should never have to choose between one love and another." The silence between them felt like prayer. Then the woman reached into her saddlebag and pulled something out. A bundle. Software breathing. The baby, wrapped again in the red shawl. Clara stepped back, hand to her mouth. "He is not here to stay," the woman said gently, "but he is here to be loved." She placed the baby into Clara's arms, and the child smiled. Not just gurgled, not just blinked, smiled. Clara sank to her knees, held him like fire in her arms, and whispered through a cracked voice, "You came home." That evening, the Comanche camp was made just beyond her land. Not in secret, not in challenge, just there, a respectful distance. 3 small tents, a fire, and nothing else. Clara walked over as the stars began to rise. She brought stew and warm water and a storybook in English, even though none of them read it, just to be near them. Just to say, without saying, "You can stay." In the morning, the warriors packed up. No one spoke of leaving. No one cried. Clara handed the baby to his father again, but this time her arms didn't ache with loss. She placed a new shawl around him, one she made herself, in silence, with care. Embroidered on the corner, a small symbol, a bird flying through snow. The father saw it and nodded. "This means," he said, "he now has 2 winters, one in my blood, one in yours." She watched them ride off, the child looking over his father's shoulder, eyes wide, hand reaching toward her once. Just once. And then they were gone. Weeks passed, then months, then spring. The creek thawed, the crops took root, and Clara lived. Not waiting, not mourning, just living. Each Sunday she still baked 2 loaves of cornbread. Sometimes they both stayed on the shelf. Sometimes one was gone by morning. But one day, one ordinary brilliant day, a ribbon arrived, tied around the door handle. Red, frayed at the ends. Attached to it, a tiny, crudely carved piece of wood, a bird, with snow beneath its wings. Spring didn't arrive gently. It scraped its way into the valley like a thief, slow, muddy, uninvited. The snow didn't melt so much as collapse, turning the roads into sludge, the fields into thick brown soup. Clara's boots sank deeper every day, her skirts stained with the stubborn refusal of the season to fully surrender to warmth. But the worst was over. The baby was gone, but alive, and Clara was still here, but changed. She hadn't seen the warriors again, hadn't heard from the father, the woman, or any rider from that world beyond the ridge. But every morning she boiled water, made coffee, and laid her hand over the small cradle by the stove, as if warming it with memory. Sometimes she imagined she still felt a heartbeat in the quilt. One day while repairing the fence that split the north field, she spotted tracks. Fresh ones, not horses, not wagon wheels, boots, wide, deliberate, and far too close to the house for comfort. She followed them, not out of fear, but instinct. They looped behind the barn, past the well, then veered into the woods. There, tucked between 2 elms, she found something that made her breath catch. A fire pit, old coals, still warm, and beside it, a ribbon, red, frayed, tied in a perfect knot and nailed gently into the bark of a tree. No name, no symbol, just color. But that was enough. That evening, as she swept the floor of the cabin, she found herself humming. She didn't realize it until she caught herself. Dust clouding in the air, her fingers working the broom like a metronome. It wasn't a song from childhood, not something taught. It was the melody she had rocked the child to, the one she invented one snow-heavy night, when he couldn't sleep and neither could she, and now it came back to her. Note by note, her lullaby to a borrowed son. The next day someone knocked. It wasn't Comanche. It wasn't a neighbor either. It was a woman, mid-30s, apron tied tight, eyes swollen from crying. "My sister said, you helped deliver a baby near Pinto Crossing," she said. Clara nodded. "I did. My cousin's in labor. It's gone wrong. They sent someone for the doctor, but I don't think he'll make it in time." Clara didn't hesitate. She packed warm water, herbs, cloth, then her hands. The baby was breech, the mother already near faint from pain. Clara worked in silence. She didn't panic, didn't flinch. Her voice calm, her movements confident. She turned the infant with 2 fingers, and a prayer whispered in a language she barely remembered. The child emerged red and screaming. The mother wept. The grandmother collapsed in relief. The cousin crossed herself. And Clara, she stood still, blood on her apron, a quiet fire in her eyes. No one thanked her. But when she turned to leave, they pressed a small basket into her hands. Inside, eggs, potatoes, bread, and beneath it all, a tiny knitted cap. She kept that last part, folded it into the chest at the foot of her bed, next to the Comanche medallion. Weeks passed. Life crept back into the valley. So did stories. Some whispered she was a healer. Some said she was touched by spirits. Some feared her. Some respected her. But no one ignored her. Then one morning she returned from the creek to find hoofprints in her yard. Dozens. No sound. No riders. Just impressions in the mud. And beneath the windowsill, a moccasin. Tiny, embroidered in white and gold. Tucked inside it, a strip of tanned hide. A message written in English, uneven but clear. "He speaks your name now." Clara held the note like a relic. Her fingers shook, not with fear, but awe. She didn't know what to do with joy that came so quietly. So she did what she always did when silence felt too big. She baked 2 loaves, one for the table, one for the creek stone. She added honey this time. That Sunday, she dressed in her old lace blouse, tied her hair up, rode into town for the first time in 4 months. The town fell quiet when she tied her mule to the post outside the general store. She stepped inside, picked up a spool of twine, a jar of preserves, and a tin of coffee. No one spoke until she reached the counter. Edna Marsh, the storekeep's wife, cleared her throat. "You still seeing Indians?" Clara placed the tin on the counter. "I don't see races," she said. "I see people." "That's not what the town council says." Clara leaned forward. "Then maybe they should stop looking through fear and start looking through fire." No one said anything after that. Edna rang up the sale in silence, and Clara left with her head held higher than it had been in years. That night, a bundle was left at her door. Inside, a single drawing, charcoal on animal hide, a child, chubby-faced, smiling, held between 2 women, one with braids, one with a familiar red shawl. Summer came early. The rains held off. The crops rose fast. The valley dried into golden stretches of wheat and dust, and the sky went quiet the way it does when something important is about to happen. Clara felt it, in her bones, in the way the wind pressed against the house at night, not howling, not begging, just asking. The next message didn't come by rider or carving or gift. It came in a story, told over tea by an old widow named Harriet Flynn, who wandered the hills near the southern ridge. "I saw a line of them," she whispered, eyes wide. "Comanche, at least 30, painted, moving through the tall grass like ghosts." "When?" Clara asked. "3 nights ago." "Where?" "Toward Widow's Hollow." Clara felt her stomach drop. That hollow, tucked between the split peaks of the limestone cliffs, was sacred ground to the Comanche. She had never been there, but the baby had come from that direction in the storm, and something in her heart told her, "Go back." She left at sunrise, didn't tell anyone, didn't leave a note. She packed water, a knife, a small mirror, and a scrap of red cloth. No food. She didn't expect to eat. She wasn't going as a guest. She was going as someone summoned. The trail twisted through burned scrub and brittle trees. The closer she got to the cliffs, the more the wind changed, carrying the smell of sage and sun-warm rock, dry and ancient. By mid-afternoon, she reached the ridge. She tied her mule to a cedar, walked the last half-mile on foot, and then she saw them. Tents, hide-covered, painted with animal shapes, moons, and rivers. Children playing with sticks, a fire in the center, warriors sharpening blades, women plaiting rope, but no one raised a weapon. No one called her out. They just watched, because they knew her, and she knew herself. She stepped into the camp, didn't wait to be invited. She didn't need to, because from the largest tent, a voice called, "Natu Ane." He stepped out slowly, the father, the war chief, his red cloak replaced by a linen tunic, his hair braided with bone beads. In his arms, the boy, not a baby now, a toddler, healthy, round-cheeked, black eyes bright with recognition. When he saw her, he leaned forward and flailed his arms. "Ma!" The camp went silent, not in shame, not in awe, just in recognition, as if a prophecy had fulfilled itself in the voice of a child who hadn't known how to speak until that very moment. Clara froze, then walked forward. The chief handed her the child. No words, no ritual, just trust. She held him. He leaned against her chest, and she cried, for the first time, not in grief, but in completion. That night they danced, not Clara. She sat by the fire, the boy asleep on her lap. But the women moved like wind, like water, like breath, their feet stirring dust in perfect rhythm, their hands drawing stories from air. The fire didn't roar, it pulsed, like a heartbeat. One woman leaned over and placed something beside Clara. A piece of deer hide, painted with 3 symbols, a cradle, a fire, and 2 birds flying beside each other. She looked up. The woman smiled and said, "We do not burn what the wind delivers." Clara didn't understand, not until morning. She woke to find the boy gone. Her heart kicked against her ribs, but only once. Then she heard his laughter and followed the sound to a place just beyond the camp. He was with the chief and a small group of young warriors. They were showing him how to ride, not a real horse, a stick. But the boy shrieked with joy each time they galloped in circles, his arms wide like wings. The chief looked at Clara and said, "We are not here for war." She nodded. "I know," he continued. "Some wanted it. After the storm, after they saw a woman take a blood child, there were voices that said, 'Burn her.' And I said no." "Why?" He smiled. "No warrior sets fire to the place his son was reborn." Before she left, the chief handed her a pouch. Inside, seeds. "Wild tobacco," he said. "Mix it with your garden. It will remind him of both homes." Clara placed it in her pack. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't have to. When she turned to leave, the boy cried once. Reach for her. But the father held him steady. "Your mother," he said softly in Comanche, "is in the wind, not the fire." And the boy quieted. She walked the whole way home. Didn't look back, didn't ride, because some journeys are only complete when your feet touch every stone of the road. That evening, she stood at her garden gate, pulled the pouch from her pocket, and scattered the seeds into the soil with care. A ritual, a planting, a promise. Autumn arrived like an old friend. No fanfare, just a shift in the light, the way the shadows leaned longer on the dirt road, how the apples grew heavier on the trees, how the crows grew louder in the early mornings. Clara moved slower now, not because she was tired, but because she had learned that nothing worth holding ever rushed toward you. And still, the boy didn't return. Not physically, not with footsteps or pony hooves or the whisper of feathers on the wind, but he was everywhere. His shawl still hung near the stove, the one she'd sewn with crooked stitches, red as desert stone. His drawing, charcoal on hide, was pinned above the mantel. She'd carved his name into the windowsill, just small enough not to be noticed, but deep enough never to be erased. Some days she'd wake and swear she heard him crying. Other days she dreamed of him laughing. But mostly he lived in the in-between. A giggle on the breeze, a feather on the step, a single moccasin left near the well. The valley quieted, the town forgot. They called her Miss Whitmore again. They stopped asking about the Comanche, stopped whispering in stores. She wasn't news anymore. She was just there. But she didn't mind, because the ones who mattered still remembered. Then one November morning she found a letter, pressed between the doorframe and the post, held there by a carved stone. The handwriting was rough, not Comanche, not local, just learning. Inside were 5 words. "I miss you, Mom." Clara held the letter for a long time, then placed it inside the pocket of her dress. Didn't cry, didn't smile, just stood there like a woman rooted to 2 lives, stitched at the edge of 2 worlds. Weeks passed, and then one morning while baking, she heard the knock. It wasn't urgent, it wasn't loud, just certain. She opened the door and froze, because there he was, the boy, not in arms this time, not swaddled, standing, barefoot, hair braided, cheeks full, taller than she remembered, holding the hand of the woman in blue, the one who had first brought him back. He said nothing, just walked forward, placed both his tiny hands on Clara's skirt, and looked up. "Ma?" Clara dropped to her knees, held him tight, and whispered, "I hoped you'd come back standing." He laughed. "I came running. I just walked the last part." They stayed 3 nights. The boy slept in his old cradle the first night, then asked to sleep on the floor beside her bed the next. Clara let him. The woman brought herbs, stories, a woven pouch of dried meat and fruit. They shared no firelit ceremony, no grand reunion, just long silences filled with warmth. On the second night, as they shelled peas by candlelight, the boy sat in her lap and asked, "Did I come from your belly?" Clara stilled. The woman looked down. Clara considered lying, then she placed her hand over his heart. "Number, you didn't come from here," she said softly, "but from here." She tapped her chest. The boy nodded, like he already knew. Then that means I have two hearts, he said, and she pulled him closer. Yes, and two homes. When they left, the woman didn't say where they were going. Clara didn't ask. The boy turned once from his pony, grinned wide, and held up a stone, a feather carved into it. He threw it to her gently. She caught it midair. He said, I'll bring you more. Then they rode, not away, just onward. That winter, Clara planted the seeds. The tobacco grew fast. She mixed it with lavender, let it dry, then burned small bundles at dusk. She didn't pray. She didn't speak. She just let the smoke curl through the rafters like a reminder. In spring, she rode south, near the creek, found a new stone tucked in the same place she used to leave cornbread. Carved in it, a bird in flight. This one had her eyes. Clara never married again, never left the valley. But when she died, many years later, she wasn't buried in the churchyard. She was laid to rest in a circle of stones beneath the pine trees near the creek, and on her grave, a single word was carved into the wood. Ma. Now it's your turn. If you were the child Clara found that night, crying in the snow, could you walk away from the arms that kept you warm when the world turned cold? Think about it. If a stranger saved your life, what would you call them? If a child belonged to two worlds, one of blood and one of choice, which one would feel like home? And tell me this, is a mother born through bloodlines or through the quiet way she holds you when no one else will? Leave your thoughts below, because the wind will carry us to another story soon. But for now, we've stood in Clara's valley, and out there, beneath pine and memory, one word still echoes. Magister. The land had grown quiet around Dusty Fork. Too quiet. It had been nearly a year since anyone dared ride this far east of the Missouri Ridge without good reason or a loaded rifle. The wind didn't whisper anymore, it scraped. It peeled paint from doors, lifted dust from dry creek beds, and scattered what little hope remained. June Calder stood alone on the edge of her property, wrapped in her husband's old coat, staring at the dying corn in the field. The rows had wilted weeks ago. The well gave nothing but sand, and the neighbors who used to wave from their wagons no longer came down her trail. Grief had built this silence. Her husband's fevered death, her baby's stillborn cries swallowed by the storm, all buried beneath the cottonwood tree behind the barn. Since then, June had become less a woman, more a shadow that cooked, cleaned, mended, and waited for rain, for time to pass, for something to mean anything again. That was the morning she heard it. A thump, soft, wet. At first she thought it was a deer, maybe a cougar cub straying too close. But when she stepped beyond the fence with her shotgun raised, what she found instead would change everything. A boy, barefoot, bleeding, Lakota, maybe 12, maybe dying. And in that moment, June Calder didn't think of borders or laws or what the town might say. She just dropped to her knees, reached for him, and whispered, "You stay with me now. You hear me?" She didn't yet know his name, but she knew what it meant to be left behind, and she would not let it happen again. June Calder had never carried anything so light that felt so heavy. The boy's body, limp in her arms, was all sharp elbows and heat. His forehead burned against her shoulder as she stumbled back toward the cabin, his breath raspy and shallow like wind through cracked wood. She didn't think, just moved. The old dog didn't even bark when she kicked open the door with her heel. It had seen death before, knew when to growl and when to watch. June laid the boy down on the cot by the hearth, the one that still smelled faintly of pine tar and her husband's sweat. Idoka didn't flinch when she peeled away his shirt. The wound in his side was ugly, dark red, crusted, threaded with infection. Someone had tried to pack it with moss and twine, but the heat in his skin said it wasn't enough. Bullet wound, clean through. She'd seen that kind before, the kind you weren't meant to walk away from. "Damn it," she muttered, pulling her apron over her mouth. "You've no right dragging this into my life, boy." But her hands didn't stop moving. She boiled water, crushed willow bark, poured the last of her whiskey over the wound. His body jerked, but he didn't scream. He just watched her with those black, unreadable eyes, like she was part of some dream he hadn't decided to believe yet. "You understand me?" she asked. A flicker of a nod. Barely. All right then, don't die. That's the only rule in this house. She stitched him with trembling hands, her breath catching each time the thread bit through his skin. Not from squeamishness, from memory. She had sewn her husband shut once, after a barbed wire accident. He'd held her wrist and smiled through the pain. Etika did not smile, did not cry. Only after it was done did he whisper, hoarse and dry. Etika. June paused. That your name? He blinked once. Slow. Yes. She dipped a rag in cool water and wiped his forehead. I'm June. This place is mine. Ain't much, but it's what I got. And right now, you're in it. So rest. She didn't ask why he was here. Didn't ask who shot him. Some questions had answers that arrived with torches. The first night she didn't sleep. She sat in the rocker near the door, shotgun across her lap, ears straining against the wind. Atoka mumbled in his sleep. Words she didn't know. Names she couldn't place. Fever dreams. Maybe prayers. Once he jerked upright and cried out in Lakota. June was beside him before he fully woke, hand pressed gently to his chest. Still here, she whispered. Still breathing. His eyes opened, wide and wild. They come. Not tonight, she said, but in her bones she felt it. Someone had put a bullet in that boy, and people who put bullets in children didn't often leave things unfinished. The next morning the fever broke. June opened the window just enough to let fresh air in. The hills shimmered in the sun, brittle with heat, too quiet. She moved slowly around the cabin, careful not to wake him. When she checked his bandages, he didn't stir. She stepped outside to draw water from the well. That's when she saw them. Tracks, hoof prints. Not old, not scattered like mustangs or elk. Purposeful. 3 horses, maybe 4, had passed within 50 feet of her door. No sign of stopping, no sign of hurrying. That was worse. June dropped the bucket and ran back inside. Bolted the door. Atoka was sitting up now, pale but awake. You shouldn't be up, she said. He nodded toward the window. They look. She exhaled hard. You don't know that. I do, he said. They smell weakness. June paused. He was right. She crouched beside him, her fingers trembling now. Who are they? Etika looked down at his hands. Not soldiers, not tribe. Bad ones. Wear blue, but not army. Bounty men. He nodded once. They know I live, she asked. Itoka shook his head. Not yet. June stood slowly. Her back cracked. Her heart did too. Then we keep it that way. That afternoon she moved the cot from the window, dragged sacks of flour and wood over it, like clutter would erase presents. She scattered tools around, removed the bloodied cloths, burned them behind the barn. Atoka helped as much as he could. He never complained, though his skin went pale with effort. You should have died out there, she told him. I didn't. Number. And now we both might. He looked at her, calm. You saved me. She didn't answer. Didn't have to. The wind answered for her, whispering across the dry boards of the cabin like breath across bone. She didn't regret it. Not yet. But night was coming, and the plains never stayed quiet for long. The wind shifted by noon, bringing with it the smell of dust and iron. June felt it before she saw anything. Years of working the land had taught her to listen when the breeze changed its voice. She stepped outside and scanned the ridge, one hand resting on the butt of her Winchester. There it was, a shimmer of heat. Then a rider. Number 3. Not galloping, not announcing themselves, just drifting closer like smoke. June's stomach knotted. She ducked back inside, bolting the door behind her. Etika was awake on the cot, propped on one elbow, alert despite the sheen of sweat on his brow. You saw them, he said. June nodded, voice low. 3, maybe more behind. Who? Don't know yet, but they ride like they mean to ask questions. Etika shifted, jaw tight with pain. I hide. She hesitated, then helped him move. She dragged an old storage chest beside the hearth and cleared out the firewood and rags. It wasn't large, but Atoka squeezed himself in with a grimace, wrapping the blanket around his wounded shoulder. June tossed old coats and burlap sacks on top, then closed the lid halfway. It wasn't perfect, but it was all they had. Then came the knock. 3 short raps. Not polite, not threatening, just certain. June opened the door with her chin high. On the porch floor stood a man in a dusty tan coat, badge glinting on his chest. Thin-lipped, pale eyes, smile that didn't reach anything but his teeth. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "Name's Deputy Clay Maddox, out of Dusty Fork. Mind if we come in a minute?" June didn't move. "What's your business?" The man glanced over his shoulder. 2 more riders waited behind him, one tall and wiry, the other with a shotgun across his back, and the look of a man who hadn't bathed since winter. "We're tracking a boy," Maddox said. "Lakota, maybe 12. Got shot about a day south of here. Word is he slipped through the mesquite and kept moving. That trail led close to your well." "I haven't seen a soul," June replied, cool and steady. "You sure about that?" "I'm sure what I've seen and what I haven't. And if I'd seen a wounded child bleeding to death, I'd be busy digging, not talking." The deputy's eyes narrowed. He stepped forward, boots creaking on the porch. "Mind if we take a look inside?" June crossed her arms. "Got a warrant?" "No, ma'am." "Then I mind." For a beat, no one spoke. Then the man behind Maddox shifted his shotgun. "You really gonna make this hard, Miss Calder?" June's voice dropped. "You aiming to force your way past a widow with a loaded rifle and nothing to lose?" Maddox raised a hand. Now. No need for dramatics. We're just doing our job. You've done it. Now ride on." He gave her a long, cold look, then turned without another word. As they mounted up, the taller man muttered something to the other, too low to hear, but their glances back toward the cabin told June enough. They weren't convinced, and they weren't done. After they left, June locked the door and collapsed into the chair, hands shaking. Itoka crawled out of the chest slowly, face pale, lips pressed thin. "They return. I know. They won't knock next time. I know." She knelt beside him. "You shouldn't be here." "I can leave." "You'll die." He didn't argue. He just looked at her with those impossibly old eyes, full of fire that hadn't gone out yet. "I won't let them take you," she said, surprising herself. Etika blinked. "Why?" June stared at her hands, at the scar across her wrist from that time she fell through the porch rail, at the calluses from years of hoeing and hammering alone. "Because you're not the first thing to bleed in this house." That night she slept in shifts, dozed in the rocker, one eye on the window. She kept the rifle loaded, 2 knives on the table, and a jar of jerky within reach. Itoka slept light. His dreams were quieter now. No shouts, just murmurs in a language June would never understand but somehow trusted anyway. At dawn, she opened the door to find something strange. A single feather, black-tipped, tied with red string to the fence post. She unfastened it carefully, turned it over in her hand. Itoka saw it from the cot. His face changed. "Yamni sign," he whispered. "Shadow Scouts." "Yours?" He shook his head. "Number enemies to peace." June stared at the horizon, where the dust was starting to rise again. "How many enemies you got, boy?" Etika's voice came quiet behind her. "All of them." By the 3rd day, Itoka could walk again, just barely, and only from the cot to the stove and back. But every step was a small rebellion, a defiance of death, and June watched him like a hawk with pride she didn't dare admit. The weather held dry and mean. Buzzards circled low over the southern ridge, and the sky refused to soften. Still, June kept the windows cracked, the water boiling and her eyes open. She'd seen enough signs in her life to know what silence before a storm really meant. Etika spent the morning stacking dry wood by the hearth. It wasn't much and it hurt him, but he did it anyway. When he finished, he sat cross-legged on the floor, sharpening a rusted pocket knife June had found in her husband's old toolbox. "You don't have to help," she said. "I do," he replied. "I take space. I eat food. I breathe your air." June frowned. "You're not a burden." He glanced up. "Where I come from, to survive and not give back is shame. Well, out here to survive is all the giving we've got some days." That made him smile. Just faintly, like it surprised him he still could. After lunch, salted pork, hard bread, and weak coffee, June sat at the table with a pile of worn playing cards and started sorting them into pairs. Itoka watched her from across the room. "What is that?" he asked. "Solitaire," she said. "Game you play alone when you've got no one else." "You have me." June's hand paused over the Queen of Spades. Then she looked up, caught off guard by the honesty in his tone. "I guess I do," she said softly. He smiled faintly, almost shy, but it lingered, like the words had meant more than he let on. They spent that afternoon talking in pieces. Edeka taught her Lakota words for wind, tate, sun, wai, and blood, wiyushkin. She taught him how to say sky and grit and neighbor, though she confessed that in Dusty Fork, neighbor didn't mean what it used to. He told her about his mother's medicine pouch, about learning to ride before he could read, about his father, Red Elk, a chief with a hard face but hands that braided his son's hair every spring. "She called me a toka," he said, "means leader born second. I was second son. Now I am first." June looked at him. "Your brother?" "Fever last winter." She nodded. "Mine too. He drowned. Before the war." There was silence. Then Atoka asked, "Your husband, was he good?" June blinked. "He tried to be. That was enough." "Did he die fast?" "No," she said. "Fever took him slow. Like a coward. Left nothing but bones, and a name I still speak out loud so the walls won't forget him." Atoka nodded once, solemn. "Then you remember well." She reached for the kettle and poured them both more water. No tea this time, just warmth. That night, as dusk leaned in through the windows and the fire cracked low, Atoka spoke again. "If I die, will you bury me with name?" June turned sharply. "You're not dying." He tilted his head. "You said not to lie in this house." She clenched her jaw, then stood and pulled her husband's old coat from the peg by the door. She threw it over Atoka's shoulders. "You die when I say you can, and I ain't said it." He smiled again, a real one this time, teeth and all. "Bossy," he said. "Damn right," she muttered. That night, June couldn't sleep. The wind had picked up again, sharp, slicing through the cracks in the shutters like it had teeth. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, fingers curled tight around the rifle beside her bed. Atoka stirred only once, whispering something in Lakota. Not a prayer, not a warning, just a name. June didn't know if it was his mother, his brother, or someone he'd never see again. But in the dark, she whispered back, "We're still here." And somehow that felt like enough. At sunrise, June went out to check the traps she'd set by the dry creek bed. No rabbits, no tracks, but someone had been there. A single boot print by the edge of the brush, not large, but deep. A man watching, waiting, leaving just enough of himself behind to say, "I'm coming back." She returned to the cabin with her heart pounding and her mouth dry. Etika was awake, sharpening that same dull blade, his face unreadable. "They were close," she said. He didn't ask who. He just nodded and said, "They know I still live." June took a breath. "Then we make sure you stay that way." And she meant it, with everything she had left. The smell of smoke hit her before she saw the flames. It wasn't her cabin, not yet, but someone had set fire to the old cattle shut up on the ridge. It hadn't been used in years, just a skeleton of slats and wire left to rot. But it was hers. It was on her land. And someone had burned it to say, "We're watching, we're close, and next time, it'll be your door." June stood at the edge of the field, rifle cradled in her arms, watching the shed collapse into a halo of ash and sparks. Her breath came slow, steady. She didn't curse, didn't shout, just turned and walked back to the cabin. Atoka met her on the porch. He didn't ask what happened. He could smell it too. "Warning," he said. June nodded. "They want fear first. They want hesitation." She glanced at him. "They're not getting either." That evening, she pulled every bullet she owned from the lockbox under the floorboards, counted them out on the kitchen table. 43. Enough for one long fight. Maybe. Atoka watched her clean the Winchester, his expression unreadable. "You're not the same woman who found me," he said. June didn't look up. Number she was already tired. "I just hadn't admitted it yet." Silence. Then he asked, "If they come for me, will you give me up?" She set the rifle down, met his eyes. "No." Etika nodded once. That was all he needed. They spent the next day preparing. Etika limped along the fence line, setting up small noise traps, tin cans, shards of glass strung between branches. Little things to buy seconds if trouble came after dark. June reinforced the door with an iron bar she salvaged from the barn. Moved the stove so it didn't block their path if they had to run. She didn't say what they both knew. There might not be anywhere to run to. At sunset, June sat on the porch, sharpening a carving knife, the last of her late husband's tools. Etika came out holding a bundle wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it carefully. A strip of red-dyed deer hide, a few braided feathers, and a small clay charm marked with a spiral. "What is it?" June asked. "Protection," he said. "My mother made it before I left. It didn't stop the bullet, but maybe it brought you." June's throat tightened. She looked away. "Your people have charms. Mine have crosses." Etika shrugged. "Whatever gives courage." She nodded. "Then I'll take it." He handed her the charm, and she tied it to the post by the porch, where it caught the wind and danced like a flame refusing to go out. That night something moved in the dark. June sat in the rocker again, rifle across her lap. The fire was kept low. The windows were shut tight. Itoka lay on the floor, not sleeping, listening. Then it came. The snap of a twig, the rattle of a tin can. Not far. 30 yards, maybe less. June didn't breathe. Etika rolled silently to his feet, blade in hand. He crouched by the window and peeked through the shutter. "Two men," he whispered, one watching, one circling. June crept toward the back door, checked the lock again, and pressed her ear to the wall. Faint murmuring, then quiet. They were probing, measuring fear, like wolves sniffing the edge of a fence. Suddenly, a rock hit the side of the cabin, loud, hard. June flinched, gun raised. No gunfire followed, just retreating footsteps and distant laughter. "They want us to panic," she whispered. Etika didn't answer, but his shoulders stayed high, tense. He moved to the hearth and sat cross-legged, breathing deep, eyes closed like he was listening to something far beyond the walls. June watched him. Strange how stillness could carry its own kind of power. They didn't speak again that night. The men didn't return, but now they knew what kind of war was coming. At dawn, a shadow moved across the southern ridge. June lifted the spyglass, the old cavalry one Jacob had brought back from Vicksburg. A rider, alone. No badge, no banner. But the way he rode told her everything. Not scouting, searching. Itoka stepped up beside her. "He's not Yamni," he said. "Not white either." June adjusted the glass. "One of yours?" Itoka squinted. "Maybe." She lowered the glass and turned to him. "Would your father send someone?" Itoka's voice dropped. "If he thinks I'm alive." June nodded once. "Then let's hope he gets here first. Because if he didn't, the next ones who came might not be testing fences. They might be lighting torches." Just before midnight, the wind died. June sat awake at the table, lantern low, rifle across her lap. Her hands didn't shake anymore. Not from fear, at least. From stillness, the kind that comes before something breaks. Etika crouched by the hearth, quiet as smoke. He hadn't spoken for over an hour, not since the scout on the ridge vanished into the trees. Outside, the world held its breath. Then, metal scraped against wood. Back door. June spun toward the sound, heart hammering. A shutter creaked. Another tin can rattled, not softly this time. Loud, deliberate. "They're here," Itoka said. Then came the knock. Not 3 soft taps like before, just one. Heavy, flat. June didn't move. "Who is it?" she called, voice steel. A pause, then a voice. Rough, familiar. "Deputy Maddox, you know why we're here." Etika tensed. June stepped away from the window, pressed her back to the wall. "You got no law here," she said. "You ride without a warrant. That makes you a raider." "Call it what you want, ma'am," Maddox replied. "We tracked a Lakota boy to your land. He's dangerous. We're taking him." "You won't find him." "Oh, I will," Maddox said. "You got till sunrise to hand him over. After that, we stopped being polite." Then came silence. No retreating hoofbeats this time. They were waiting. At dawn, the sun crawled over the horizon like it too wasn't sure it wanted to rise. June stood on the porch, spyglass in hand. There they were, 7 riders, 6 on horses, 1 on a wagon with a rope and a rifle rack. Too many for a warning, too few for mercy. June turned to Attica. We can't outgun them. He didn't flinch. We outlast them. June glanced at the bundle he held, his satchel, his knife, the charm his mother had made. He looked so small with it on his back, but his eyes said otherwise. He wasn't a boy anymore. He was standing his ground. Suddenly, a sharp whistle pierced the morning air, not from the men waiting outside, from the northern ridge. June spun, raising the glass. She almost dropped it. A second group. Lakota riders. A dozen, maybe more. Dark silhouettes moving fast across the plain, low to the ground. No dust trail. Silent and smooth as a hunting party. At their head rode a tall man draped in buffalo hide, hair braided down his back, painted face calm and grim. Atoka stepped forward. Breath caught. Father, June exhaled. Thank God. Atoka whispered something in Lakota and stepped down from the porch. June followed, rifle still in hand, heart pounding in a new rhythm. Hope. The Lakota riders reached the cabin line and halted. Red Elk dismounted, boots silent in the dirt. He didn't rush, didn't speak. Atoka approached slowly, lowered his head. Red Elk placed a hand on his son's shoulder. You live, he said. Atoka nodded. Because of her. Red Elk turned to June, expression unreadable. You are brave. June's throat tightened. I'm just tired of burying boys. He looked at her, really looked, then gave the smallest nod. Then you will not bury this one. Deputy Maddox saw the new arrivals. He cursed. June and Red Elk stepped forward together. Maddox raised a hand, voice louder now. This doesn't change a damn thing. You're outnumbered, June called back, and out of time. I serve justice. You serve fear, Red Elk said coldly. Behind Maddox, one of his men turned in his saddle, uneasy. Another slowly lowered his rifle. Maddox growled. They're savages. You stand with them, Calder. Then you're no better. I stand with what's right, she said. Then die with it. He reached for his gun, but before he could draw, an arrow thunked into the ground at his feet. Dead center. A warning. Maddox looked up and saw 20 more bows raised, strings taut. He froze, then spat into the dirt. This ain't over. No, Red Elk said, but your power is. Maddox turned and rode off. The others followed, silent, shamed, defeated. June lowered her rifle. Atoka exhaled. Red Elk looked to the horizon. They will return. Not today, but one day. June nodded. I'll be ready. He met her gaze. You should come with us. Atoka stepped forward. Number 1, stay. Red Elk looked between them, then said nothing more. That night, for the first time in days, no tin cans rattled, no shadows circled, only wind and stars. June sat by the fire with Atoka, hands still, heart quiet. You stayed, she said. I owe you. I didn't do it for debt. He smiled. I know. That's why it matters. She looked at the red thread charms still tied to the porch post, fluttering in the night air. They were still in danger, but they weren't alone. By morning, the Lakota riders were gone. Red Elk had departed before the sun rose, leaving no campfire behind, no tracks deeper than memory. Just a feather on the porch rail, bound in red thread, fluttering like a promise not yet broken. June stepped out into the quiet with her coffee in hand, her boots crunching frost where shadow still clung to the grass. Etika stood by the field looking toward the hills. They move fast, she said. They know how not to be followed, he replied. She nodded. Maddox won't be back soon, not after what happened, but he'll find another reason one day. I know. The silence between them wasn't fearful anymore. It was worn in, like an old coat, familiar and earned. Etika turned to her. I should go. June stared at him, then nodded once. I figured. My father wants me to learn from elders, speak in the councils, build something new from what burned. That sounds like a lot for someone who just learned how to boil coffee. He gave her a crooked smile. You taught me enough. No, she said, voice catching. You taught me something. He tilted his head. That life doesn't end when we lose someone. It just waits. And if we're lucky, it waits in the shape of someone who needs saving too. Atoka stepped closer, pulled something from his satchel, a small wooden carving, smoothed by oil and fire, a hawk in flight. My brother made it. It's for protection. June's hand trembled as she took it. I don't need protection. You do, he said, but not from bullets. She blinked hard. Will I ever see you again? If I live, he said, you'll see smoke one day from Yellow Ridge. That means we're safe, that we made peace last. And if you don't, he paused, then said, then carve this hawk into your gate. Let people ask what it means. She nodded, couldn't speak. They said their goodbyes without words. Itoka mounted the pony that Red Elk had left for him. He rode off slow, not looking back until he reached the tree line. Then he turned, raised his hand once, and disappeared into the timber like a shadow sliding into sun. June stood still until she couldn't see him anymore. Then she turned back to the cabin. It didn't feel so empty now. In the weeks that followed, life returned in small, quiet ways. The chickens began laying again. A neighbor, Silas Webb, rode by for the first time in months, offering a sack of potatoes and a clumsy apology. I heard what happened, he said, not meeting her eyes. Then you heard wrong, June replied. What happened was peace, and it nearly got us both killed. Silas scratched his beard. Folks in town talk. Say you kept an Indian boy here. Say you raised a war party to your porch. June smiled. That's so? They say you put your rifle between the law and what was right. She looked at him for a long time. I did. Silas tipped his hat. Then you've got more guts than 10 men I know. Then he turned and rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and something close to respect behind. Spring came late that year. The frost lingered, but the ground softened just enough to plant again. June sowed new rows by hand, her fingers aching, back sore, breath short. But she did it anyway. And one morning, just after the last frost broke, she saw it. Smoke, rising from the Yellow Ridge. A single line. Not wide enough to be fire. Not frantic enough to be danger. Just a message, plain and clear. Still here. She stood on the porch with the hawk carving in her hand, tied it above the door, right next to the red thread feather. And for the first time in years, she smiled with her whole face. Because some things don't need to be said. Some things are understood in silence, in survival, in what we choose to protect even when no one's watching. Etoka had come wounded, but he hadn't left broken. And she had come broken, but now she stood whole. Not because of him, but because of what she remembered in saving him. That mercy is not weakness. That survival isn't just for the strong, it's for the kind. If this story stayed with you, if it made you hold your breath when the knock came, or hope when the smoke rose from the ridge, then I want to hear from you. Because out here on the frontier, every choice meant something. Mercy could be mistaken for weakness, and protecting a child who didn't look like your own could cost you everything. But June Calder stood her ground. So let me ask you, would you have done what she did? Would you have hidden a wounded Lakota boy, knowing men like Maddox would come looking? Would you have faced rifles with nothing but resolve and a promise? Tell me in the comments. And while you're at it, let me know where in the world you're watching from. I want to know who's standing on this porch with us, across time, across place. And if you want more stories like this, tales of courage, quiet defiance, and unlikely hope on the untamed frontier, be sure to like, subscribe, and ring that bell. Tomorrow, another story waits in the dust. Until then, keep your fire burning and your door open to what's right.